Veronica Mitchell stands in her designer suit as airline security drags her off the plane despite her first-class ticket. Other passengers whisper, assuming she's done something wrong. Her phone rings. The airline's CEO begging for a meeting. What they don't know, she controls their $5 billion funding. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe justice should be served when corporations discriminate. Ready to see how one powerful black woman turned the tables on an entire airline? Let's continue. Long before Veronica Mitchell found herself being dragged off a plane in humiliation, she had been building an empire from nothing. Born in the rough neighborhoods of South Chicago, Veronica grew up watching her single mother work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Their apartment was small, the heat unreliable, but her mother made sure Veronica had everything she needed to succeed, especially books. From an early age, Veronica displayed an exceptional aptitude for mathematics. While other kids played outside, she found joy in solving complex equations, fascinated by the elegant patterns of numbers. Her teachers quickly recognized her potential, encouraging her to apply for special programs despite the underfunded public school she attended. By 16, she had completed every advanced math course her high school offered. "Numbers don't lie," her mother would tell her, "and they don't care about the color of your skin." Those words stayed with Veronica as she earned a full scholarship to Princeton University. Walking onto that ivy-covered campus for the first time, she felt the weight of being one of only a handful of black students in her program. While her classmates came from generations of wealth and privilege, Veronica worked part-time jobs between classes to send money home to her mother. The finance world wasn't waiting with open arms for a black woman from South Chicago. At her first internship at a prestigious Wall Street firm, colleagues frequently mistook her for administrative staff despite her superior qualifications. One particularly humiliating incident involved a senior partner asking her to fetch coffee during a meeting, even though she was presenting the financial analysis. "I'll get that coffee," she had said calmly, "right after I finish explaining how this investment strategy could save the company $30 million annually." The room had fallen silent. That day, Veronica promised herself she would never again be underestimated. Her rise through the financial sector was nothing short of meteoric. Starting as an analyst, she quickly became known for her uncanny ability to predict market trends and identify undervalued assets. By 30, she had become the youngest vice president in her firm's history. By 35, she had founded Mitchell Capital Partners, her own investment firm. Now, at 38, Veronica's company managed over $50 billion in assets, including major pension funds and sovereign wealth funds from across the globe. Her office occupied the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Chicago, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city where she had once been told she would never belong. Despite her wealth, Veronica lived by strict principles: dignity, fairness, and accountability. She had built her firm's reputation on ethical investing and had turned down lucrative opportunities that violated her moral code. Her employees knew her as tough but fair, someone who rewarded excellence and never tolerated discrimination in any form. On this particular Tuesday morning, Veronica was preparing for an important business trip to London. A major merger was in the works, one that would consolidate Mitchell Capital's position as a global financial powerhouse. Her schedule was meticulously planned: meetings with international partners, contract negotiations, and a keynote address at a prestigious economic forum. Traveling was routine for Veronica. First-class accommodations were standard, not for the luxury, but because she needed the space and quiet to work during long flights. Her typical experience involved being greeted by name, receiving attentive service, and enjoying the respect that came with her position. Her assistant, James Harrison, had booked her on Horizon Airlines for the transatlantic flight. The carrier was known for its extensive international routes and premium services, though Veronica had never flown with them before. Unknown to her, Horizon had recently been struggling financially, desperately seeking investors for a $5 billion fleet expansion that would secure their future in the competitive airline industry. As she packed her Givenchy suit and reviewed merger documents, Veronica had no idea that her identity as a black woman would soon override her status as a financial powerhouse, or that the discrimination she was about to face would give her an unexpected opportunity to hold an entire corporation accountable. She closed her suitcase, kissed the photo of her mother that she kept on her nightstand, and headed for the airport, completely unaware that this routine business trip was about to become anything but ordinary. The morning of the flight, Veronica arrived at O'Hare International Airport 3 hours early, as was her habit. Punctuality was more than a virtue to her, it was a necessity. She navigated through the terminal pulling her Louis Vuitton luggage, dressed in a tailored navy Armani suit that had cost more than what many people earned in a month. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, subtle diamond earrings catching the fluorescent airport lights. The first hint of trouble came at the check-in counter. While the white businessman ahead of her was processed quickly with smiles and friendly banter, the gate agent's demeanor shifted when Veronica stepped forward. The agent, a young woman named Amber, glanced at Veronica's first-class ticket and frowned slightly. "May I see some ID, please?" Amber asked, her tone noticeably cooler. Veronica provided her passport and frequent flyer card. Amber studied them with unusual scrutiny, glancing between the documents and Veronica's face multiple times. "And how did you purchase this ticket?" Amber asked. "Through my company's travel department," Veronica replied evenly, though she noticed the white couple in the adjacent first-class line hadn't been asked this question. After what seemed like an unnecessarily long verification process, Amber reluctantly handed back the documents. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Mitchell," she said without making eye contact. Veronica moved through security with the efficiency of a seasoned traveler, though she couldn't help but notice she was selected for random additional screening while several white passengers passed through without delay. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she had a merger to focus on, refusing to let these microaggressions disturb her concentration. At the gate, the pattern continued. The gate agent called for first-class boarding, and Veronica stood with the other premium passengers. As she presented her boarding pass, the agent looked her up and down. "First class is currently boarding," he said, as if she had misunderstood the announcement. "Yes, I'm aware," Veronica replied, gesturing to her first-class ticket already in his hand. With visible reluctance, he scanned her pass and waved her through, immediately turning to the white man behind her with a warm, "Welcome aboard, sir." Once on the plane, Veronica found her window seat in the third row of first class. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled in, pulling out her tablet to review some documents before takeoff. The cabin was elegant, spacious leather seats, ambient lighting, and the subtle hum of quiet conversations as other passengers boarded. It wasn't long before the flight attendant assigned to first class appeared. Brandon Walsh was tall with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smile that disappeared the moment he noticed Veronica. "Excuse me," he said with undisguised suspicion. "May I see your boarding pass?" Veronica had already been asked for her boarding pass 3 times, but she maintained her composure and handed it over once again. Brandon examined it with furrowed brows, as if searching for some flaw that would justify his suspicion. "This is seat 3A, he said, unnecessarily pointing to the window where she was clearly sitting. "Yes, I'm aware," Veronica replied, keeping her voice steady. Brandon's lips tightened, but he moved on without further comment. Veronica watched as he greeted the white passengers with warm smiles, offering them champagne and hot towels before takeoff. 20 minutes passed, and while everyone else in first class had been served, Brandon had yet to acknowledge Veronica again. The middle-aged white businessman in 3B beside her, Walter Pearson, seemed to notice the discrepancy. He glanced at Veronica, then at his own champagne flute, and frowned slightly. "Excuse me," Veronica finally called to Brandon as he passed by for the 4th time without offering her a drink. "Could I get some water before takeoff, please?" Brandon stopped, his shoulders visibly stiffening. "We're very busy with boarding right now," he said curtly. "I'll have to get to you after takeoff." Walter raised his eyebrows. "But you just brought champagne to everyone else," he pointed out. Brandon's face flushed. "Sir, I can assure you we're treating all passengers equally." Veronica felt the familiar internal conflict. Speak up and risk being labeled an angry black woman, or stay silent and accept the indignity. She had faced this choice countless times in boardrooms and business meetings. Today, she chose to advocate for herself with the same poise she brought to negotiating billion-dollar deals. "Actually," she said calmly, "you haven't offered me any of the pre-flight amenities extended to other first-class passengers. I'd appreciate the same level of service, please." Brandon's expression darkened. "I don't appreciate your tone," he said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "If you're going to be difficult, this is going to be a very long flight." Veronica blinked, taken aback by the disproportionate response to her reasonable request. "I'm simply asking for the same service you've provided to everyone else," she clarified. "You people are never satisfied," Brandon muttered just loud enough for her to hear as he stormed off toward the galley. The slur hung in the air. Several passengers looked away uncomfortably. Walter shifted in his seat beside her, clearly unsure whether to acknowledge what had just happened. Veronica sat perfectly still, her face a careful mask hiding the storm of emotions beneath. She had built a financial empire, managed billions in assets, and broken countless glass ceilings. Yet here she was, being treated as less than human because of her skin color. Brandon returned a few minutes later, not with water, but with the chief flight attendant and 2 air marshals. His face held a smug expression that made Veronica's stomach drop. She recognized what was happening immediately. She had seen this story play out in viral videos and news reports. Now it was happening to her. "This passenger is being disruptive and making the cabin crew uncomfortable," Brandon announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She'll need to deplane immediately." The stage was set for what would become not just a personal humiliation, but the catalyst for an unprecedented corporate reckoning. The hushed silence that fell over the first-class cabin seemed to amplify every sound. The click of unfastening seatbelts, the whispers between passengers, and the heavy footsteps of security approaching Veronica's seat. Time seemed to slow down as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was about to become a public humiliation. Security officers Thomas Davis and Michael Roberts moved down the aisle with an unwarranted urgency, as if responding to a terrorist threat rather than a black woman who had simply requested a glass of water. Thomas, a burly man with a crew cut, took the lead while Michael positioned himself to block the aisle. "Ma'am, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," Thomas announced, his voice carrying throughout the quiet cabin. Every passenger was now watching the scene unfold. Veronica remained composed, though her heart raced. "There must be some mistake," she said calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." "The flight attendant has reported disruptive behavior," Michael replied mechanically. "We need you to deplane immediately." Veronica reached for her purse, extracting her ID and boarding pass. "I'm Veronica Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Capital Partners. I'm a first-class passenger on this flight to London. I simply asked for the same service being provided to other passengers." Thomas barely glanced at her identification. "Ma'am, we can discuss this in the terminal. Right now, you need to come with us before things get worse." "Worse?" Veronica questioned. "How exactly could this get worse? I'm being removed from a flight for no valid reason." She noticed several passengers had taken out their phones. Some were openly recording the incident, while others pretended to text, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing but unwilling to intervene. Veronica reached for her own phone. "I need to call my assistant and legal team. This is completely unacceptable." "You can make calls after we deplane," Thomas said, reaching for her phone. "Do not touch my property," Veronica stated firmly, pulling her phone back. That was all the excuse they needed. Michael moved in swiftly, grabbing her arm while Thomas seized her phone. "That's enough. You're coming with us now." The physical contact crossed a line. Veronica Mitchell, who commanded boardrooms and managed billions in investments, was being manhandled like a criminal. The shock of it momentarily paralyzed her. "You're hurting me," she said, her voice finally betraying a tremor of emotion. Neither officer acknowledged her pain. Instead, they pulled her roughly from her seat. Her tablet fell to the floor with a crack. The project notes for her $50 million merger now lay scattered beneath the seats. The contrast was staggering. Outside this plane, Veronica was treated with deference by world leaders and financial titans. Inside, she was being dragged down the aisle like a disruptive teenager. "This is outrageous!" called out a voice from a few rows back. A young woman with copper hair stood up. "She didn't do anything wrong." Veronica recognized her as the woman who had been sitting in 5C, who had smiled at her during boarding. Now she was the only passenger brave enough to speak up. "Ma'am, return to your seat or you'll be next," Thomas threatened, not even turning around. "My name is Sophia Williams, and I'm an attorney," the woman replied. "What I'm witnessing is clear discrimination and potential assault. I'm recording this, and I strongly advise you to reconsider your actions." Michael turned toward Sophia. "Recording is not permitted during security operations. Turn off your phone now." The distraction gave Veronica a moment to regain her balance, but it was short-lived. Thomas tightened his grip on her arm, pulling her forward with enough force that her designer heel caught on the carpet. She stumbled, nearly falling, as they continued to push her toward the exit. Her Hermes scarf caught on an armrest and was yanked from her neck. Her jacket twisted awkwardly as they forced her forward. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the humiliation of being paraded past rows of staring passengers. Some averted their eyes, suddenly fascinated by the safety cards in their seatbacks. Others watched with open curiosity or shock. A few recorded the entire incident on their phones, their expressions a mix of discomfort and the peculiar fascination that comes with witnessing someone else's public humiliation. As they reached the main cabin, the whispers grew louder. "What did she do? Must have been something serious. They wouldn't just remove someone for nothing." The presumption of guilt was immediate and overwhelming. In the public eye, her blackness made her suspicious by default. The security officers didn't need to justify their actions. Her skin color had already done that for them in the minds of many passengers. By the time they reached the jet bridge, Veronica's perfectly styled hair had come undone. Her jacket was askew, and the heel of her right shoe had broken off. She was being marched through the terminal like a criminal, a successful black woman reduced to a spectacle. What did you just witness? Would you have spoken up like Sophia did or stayed silent? Comment number 1 if you believe Veronica should sue the airline immediately, or number 2 if you think she should find another way to seek justice. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're outraged by this treatment. How do you think Veronica will respond to this humiliation? Subscribe to find out what happens next in this shocking true story. The sterile walls of the airport security room seemed to close in around Veronica as she sat rigidly in a metal chair, her broken heel placed beside her designer bag on the table. The room was deliberately intimidating, windowless, with harsh fluorescent lighting that cast unflattering shadows. A security camera blinked in the corner, recording her every move. Officer Davis stood by the door, while Officer Roberts sat across from her, reviewing her identification for what seemed like the 10th time. The irony wasn't lost on Veronica. After being forcibly removed from the plane, they were now taking extraordinary measures to verify her identity. "Ms. Mitchell, you understand we're just following protocol," Roberts said, not meeting her eyes. "Which protocol specifically covers removing a first-class passenger who requested water?" Veronica asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She had spent decades perfecting the art of maintaining composure in hostile environments. This was no different, just more blatant than the discrimination she typically faced in corporate settings. "We responded to reports of a disruptive passenger," Davis interjected from the doorway. "The flight attendant said you were causing a disturbance." "I'd like to make some calls now," Veronica said, ignoring his justification. "You've verified my identity. You've searched my belongings. Unless I'm being charged with something, I have the right to contact my attorney." Roberts glanced at Davis, who nodded reluctantly. He slid her confiscated phone across the table. Veronica's fingers moved swiftly across the screen. First, she called James Harrison, her executive assistant who had been with her since she founded Mitchell Capital Partners. "James, I need the legal team mobilized immediately," she said when he answered. "I've been removed from my flight on Horizon Airlines due to racial discrimination. No, I'm fine physically, but I need Catherine and the civil rights team here as soon as possible." James's voice came through the speaker, loud enough for the officers to hear. "I'm on it. The legal team is already being notified. But Veronica, there's something you should know about Horizon Airlines." "What is it?" she asked, watching the officers shift uncomfortably. "They filed paperwork last week seeking $5 billion in funding for fleet expansion," James explained. "Their financial situation is precarious. They need this investment to stay competitive. And guess who's at the top of their prospective investors list?" Veronica's eyes widened slightly, the only break in her composed facade. "Mitchell Capital Partners," she said, understanding dawning. "Exactly. They've been courting us for months. Their CEO, Richard Thompson, has been trying to arrange a meeting with you for weeks. They have no idea they just dragged their potential savior off a plane." For the first time since the ordeal began, Veronica felt a shift in the power dynamic. The universe had handed her not just an injustice, but the leverage to address it on a scale few victims of discrimination ever received. "Interesting timing," she said, maintaining her professional tone despite the officers now listening intently. "Keep me updated on the legal team's arrival. And James? Call Diane in PR. We'll need her expertise as well." As she ended the call, the door to the security room burst open. A flustered man in an expensive suit rushed in, followed by a woman in an airport management uniform. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Alan Peterson, Airport Operations Director," the man said breathlessly. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We've just been informed of your identity, and I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate incident." The sudden change in treatment was striking. The same security officers who had manhandled her minutes ago were now standing at attention, their faces pale. "A misunderstanding?" Veronica repeated, her voice cool. "I was physically removed from a flight for requesting water. My property was damaged, and I was publicly humiliated." "That's not a misunderstanding, Mr. Peterson. That's discrimination." "Of course, you're absolutely right," Peterson stammered. "We want to make this right. We've arranged private transportation for you, and Horizon Airlines has offered their corporate jet to take you wherever you need to go." Veronica looked at him steadily. "So, now that you know I'm wealthy and powerful, I deserve respect. What about all the other black passengers who don't have my resources? Do they deserve to be treated like criminals too?" Peterson had no answer. "I don't want special treatment now," Veronica continued. "What I want is accountability. I'll be treated like any other passenger who's been wronged, and I'll use every legal avenue available to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She turned the screen to see a video of herself being dragged off the plane, already going viral on social media. The hashtag #BoycottHorizon was trending, with the video being shared thousands of times per minute. The airport director's phone rang. He answered, listening for a moment before his face drained of color. "Yes, sir," he said. "She's right here. Yes, I understand the severity. Yes, the CEO is on his way." Meanwhile, on the other side of the airport, Sophia Williams was giving a detailed statement to a different security team, her own phone full of damning footage. The dominoes were beginning to fall. Veronica's phone buzzed again, this time with a stock alert. Horizon Airlines shares had dropped 5% in the last 30 minutes as the video spread. She allowed herself the smallest smile. The company that had humiliated her was about to learn a valuable lesson about the true cost of discrimination. And unlike most victims of racial profiling, she had the power to ensure they paid that cost in full. 12 miles away from the airport, in the gleaming headquarters of Horizon Airlines, chaos had erupted. The executive floor, usually a model of corporate serenity with its minimalist design and hushed conversations, now buzzed with frantic energy. Assistants rushed between offices, phones rang incessantly, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. In the main conference room, CEO Richard Thompson paced back and forth, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of stress. His tie hung loosely around his neck, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead despite the room's perfect climate control. Around the massive mahogany table sat his executive team, each face more grim than the last. "How the hell did this happen?" Richard demanded, slamming his hand on the table. "Someone explain to me how we're trending worldwide for dragging a passenger off our plane." Patricia Alvarez, the head of public relations, cleared her throat. "The video has gone viral, Richard. Over 2 million views in the last hour alone. Every major news outlet has picked it up, and they're all requesting statements." "So give them one," Richard snapped. The standard response: "We deeply regret the incident. We're investigating the circumstances, blah, blah, blah. Offer her free miles for life or something." Patricia's expression remained grave. "I've drafted a statement, but there's a complication you need to be aware of." She slid a tablet across the table. "The passenger isn't just any business traveler. It's Veronica Mitchell." Richard stopped pacing, his face blank for a moment before recognition dawned. "Mitchell Capital Partners?" he asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. "The Veronica Mitchell?" "The very same," confirmed Jonathan Pierce, the chief financial officer, who looked like he might be ill. "The woman our security dragged off the plane controls the investment firm we've been courting for our $5 billion expansion." Richard collapsed into his chair, the full implications hitting him like a physical blow. For months, Horizon Airlines had been teetering on the financial edge. Their aging fleet needed updating to remain competitive with newer, more fuel-efficient planes. Without this massive investment, they would continue losing market share until bankruptcy became inevitable. "We had the meeting scheduled for next week," Jonathan continued, his voice hollow. "Her firm was our best prospect. They manage over $50 billion in assets and were showing serious interest in our expansion proposal." "Get her on the phone," Richard ordered, loosening his tie further. "Now!" "We've tried," Patricia said. "All calls are going straight to voicemail. Her office says she's in meetings with her legal team." The room fell silent as the executives processed what this meant. It wasn't just a PR disaster. It was potentially an existential threat to the company itself. The silence was broken by a gentle knock on the conference room door. Lauren Phillips, the company's chief diversity officer, entered the room carrying a thick folder. Lauren was one of the few black executives at Horizon, hired 8 months earlier after a previous discrimination incident had made minor headlines. "I was told there's an emergency meeting," she said, taking in the tense atmosphere. "I assume it's about the incident at O'Hare." Richard nodded grimly. "Lauren, please tell me you have some insight that can help us navigate this nightmare." Lauren placed her folder on the table. "Actually, I do, but you're not going to like it." She opened the folder, revealing printed emails and reports. "For the past 6 months, I've been sending weekly alerts about passenger complaints regarding discriminatory treatment. Specifically, multiple complaints about flight attendant Brandon Walsh." "Brandon Walsh?" Richard repeated. "The attendant who called security on Mitchell?" "The very same," Lauren confirmed. "He has 17 formal complaints in his file, 12 from passengers of color who reported differential treatment. I flagged him for immediate retraining 3 months ago, but my recommendation was overruled by his direct supervisor." Richard turned to the head of cabin services, William Foster, who squirmed visibly in his seat. "Is this true, William?" Foster adjusted his glasses nervously. "Brandon has the highest efficiency ratings in the fleet. His technical performance metrics are excellent. We considered the complaints to be subjective." "Subjective?" Lauren repeated, her professional tone barely concealing her frustration. "I documented specific instances, black passengers in first class being repeatedly asked to show their boarding passes, minorities being served last or not at all. Derogatory comments overheard by other passengers. There was nothing subjective about it." Richard rubbed his temples. "So you're telling me we had a known problem employee with a documented history of racial bias. And not only did we keep him on, we put him in our premium cabin where he encountered one of the most powerful black executives in the financial world?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Lauren said. "And it gets worse. Our current diversity training program is outdated and insufficient. In my first quarterly report, I outlined the gaps in our corporate culture that create an environment where someone like Brandon feels comfortable displaying bias. That report has been sitting on your desk, unread, for 5 months. A heavy silence fell over the room. The company's systemic failure to address racism within its ranks wasn't just a moral failing. It had now become a business catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The tension was broken by Patricia's phone buzzing. She glanced at it and looked up, her face ashen. Horizon stock is down 12% and still falling. The trading volume is extraordinary. Jonathan pulled up the financial data on his laptop and winced. At this rate, we'll lose hundreds of millions in market cap by closing bell. And without the Mitchell investment, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the room understood the dire implications. Richard's private line rang. He answered it, listening intently before his expression shifted from concern to alarm. "The board is convening an emergency session," he announced after hanging up. "They want answers in 1 hour. And," he paused, swallowing hard, "3 members have already suggested we should prepare for bankruptcy contingencies if we lose the Mitchell investment." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Richard turned to Lauren. "What do we do? How do we fix this?" Lauren closed her folder deliberately. "First, we acknowledge that this isn't just about one incident or one employee. It's about systemic issues we've ignored. Second, we need to stop thinking about this as a PR problem and recognize it as a fundamental failure of our corporate values. And third," she fixed Richard with a steady gaze, "we need to be prepared for Veronica Mitchell to demand real change, not just empty apologies." Richard nodded slowly, the reality of their position becoming clear. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with frequent flyer miles or a first-class upgrade. They had humiliated one of the few people in the world with both the power and the resources to hold them truly accountable. As the executives began strategizing their response, Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from his assistant. "Ms. Mitchell has agreed to take your call at 4 p.m. He had exactly 3 hours to prepare for what might be the most important conversation of his career, one that could determine whether Horizon Airline survived or became another cautionary tale of corporate failure. The Wellington Hotel's presidential suite transformed into a war room as Veronica Mitchell's team assembled. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, but no one was admiring the scenery. Every surface was covered with laptops, legal pads, and coffee cups as her top advisors strategized their response to the morning's events. Veronica had changed from her torn suit into a fresh outfit, a crimson power dress that made a statement without saying a word. She stood at the head of the dining table, now repurposed as a conference table, surveying her assembled team with the same analytical eye she used to evaluate investment opportunities. Catherine Bennett, her chief legal counsel, was reviewing footage of the incident on her tablet, making notes of each potential legal violation. David Carter, head of corporate strategy, analyzed Horizon Airline's financial statements, identifying vulnerabilities they could leverage. Michelle Jackson, PR director, monitored the exploding social media response, while William Turner, her financial strategist, calculated the impact of various scenarios on Horizon's stock price. "Let's assess our position," Veronica began, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil of the morning. "Catherine, what are our legal options?" Catherine looked up from her tablet. "Multiple and strong. False imprisonment, assault, discrimination under federal law, violation of your rights as a passenger. The video evidence is damning. We could file suit immediately and likely win a substantial settlement. But this isn't about money," Veronica replied. "It never has been." "Agreed," Catherine nodded. "A lawsuit would hurt them financially, but it wouldn't necessarily change their corporate culture. They'd write it off as the cost of doing business and continue with the same practices." Michelle raised her hand. "From a PR perspective, we're in an extraordinarily powerful position. The video has over 5 million views already. Boycott." Horizon is the #1 trending topic nationally. Every major news outlet is covering the story, and they're all requesting interviews with you. What's the public sentiment? Veronica asked. Overwhelmingly supportive of you, Michelle confirmed. There's the usual contingent of trolls claiming you must have done something to deserve it, but they're being drowned out. The footage is too clear. You were calm and reasonable while they were aggressive. Even conservative outlets are calling it an obvious case of discrimination. William cleared his throat. From a financial perspective, Horizon is in free fall. Their stock has dropped 20% since market open. Trading volume is 10 times normal. They're bleeding approximately $70 million in market capitalization every hour. And their financial position before this? Veronica pressed. Precarious, David interjected, turning his laptop to show her a chart. They've been losing market share to budget carriers for years. Their fleet is aging and inefficient compared to competitors. The $5 billion they're seeking isn't just for growth, it's for survival. Without this capital infusion, they'll likely face bankruptcy within 18 months. Veronica absorbed this information, her mind working through the implications. So we have legal leverage, public opinion, and financial pressure all working in our favor. The question is, how do we use this position to create meaningful change rather than just punishing one company? The room fell silent as her team considered the question. It was James who finally spoke up from his position near the window. This isn't just about Horizon Airlines, he said. This is about setting a precedent for how corporations handle discrimination. Most victims don't have your resources or platform. You can speak for them. Veronica nodded, a plan beginning to form in her mind. We need a multi-phase approach. First, we decline all interview requests for now. Let the video speak for itself. Michelle made notes on her tablet. That creates mystery and anticipation. Smart. Second, we prepare a comprehensive set of demands that focus on systemic change. Veronica continued. Not just firing the individuals involved, but overhauling their entire approach to diversity and inclusion. With concrete metrics and accountability measures, Catherine added. Exactly, Veronica agreed. And third, we use our financial position strategically. We don't immediately reject the investment opportunity. Instead, we make it conditional on their acceptance of our terms. William whistled. That's hardball. They'll have no choice but to comply or face bankruptcy. Is it hardball? Veronica challenged. Or is it simply holding them accountable? We wouldn't invest in any company with fundamentally flawed governance and cultural issues. That's just sound financial practice. As her team continued refining the strategy, Veronica's phone rang. The screen displayed Richard Thompson, CEO, Horizon Airlines. It's showtime, she said, accepting the call and putting it on speaker. Mr. Thompson, this is Veronica Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell, Richard's voice came through, strained with anxiety. Words cannot express how deeply sorry I am for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. I want to personally assure you that this does not reflect the values of Horizon Airlines, and we— Mr. Thompson, Veronica interrupted calmly. I'm not interested in apologies or platitudes. What happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of systemic issues within your organization that have been allowed to fester. There was a brief silence before Richard spoke again. You're absolutely right. This is a wake-up call for our entire company, and I take full responsibility. Taking responsibility means more than words, Mr. Thompson. It means action. My team and I are preparing a comprehensive set of requirements that would need to be met before Mitchell Capital would consider any business relationship with Horizon Airlines. Of course, Richard said quickly. Whatever you need. We can send a private jet to bring you to our headquarters immediately, or I can come to you with our entire executive team. That won't be necessary today, Veronica replied coolly. I've scheduled a board meeting of my own this evening. We'll present our terms tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I expect you and your key decision-makers to be present. We'll be there, Richard promised, relief evident in his voice at this small reprieve. After ending the call, Veronica turned back to her team. We have until tomorrow morning to develop a plan that doesn't just punish Horizon Airlines, but transforms it. This isn't about revenge. It's about creating lasting change. As they returned to work with renewed purpose, Veronica stepped away to the window, looking out at the city below. Across social media, Thousands of people were sharing their own stories of discrimination on airlines, in retail stores, at restaurants. Everyday indignities that rarely receive justice. "This isn't just for me," she whispered to herself. "This is for all of us." Have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination like what happened to Veronica? Comment number 1 if you've been in a similar situation, or number 2 if you've seen it happen to someone else. Don't forget to like this video if you're inspired by how Veronica is handling this situation. What kind of demands do you think she should make to the airline? Subscribe now to see the confrontation unfold in the next part of this incredible story. The Horizon Airlines headquarters lobby was a cathedral to commercial aviation. Soaring ceilings with exposed steel beams mimicked aircraft wings, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of planes taking off and landing at the nearby airport. Display cases showcased models of the company's fleet evolution since its founding 50 years prior. Today, however, the impressive space felt more like a funeral home, with employees speaking in hushed tones and casting nervous glances toward the executive floor. At precisely 8:55 a.m., Veronica Mitchell strode through the revolving doors, accompanied by her team of 6 professionals. She had chosen her wardrobe deliberately, a structured Alexander McQueen suit in deep burgundy that radiated power and confidence. Despite less than 24 hours passing since her humiliation, she carried herself with regal composure, back straight, head high, each step purposeful. The security guards at the reception desk immediately recognized her from the videos that had dominated the news cycle. One reached for his radio before the other stopped him with a warning glance. The last thing Horizon needed was another security incident involving Veronica Mitchell. "Ms. Mitchell," the receptionist greeted her with forced brightness. "Mr. Thompson and the executive team are expecting you. Please follow me." As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Veronica reviewed her mental checklist. Her team had worked until 3 a.m. preparing their approach, anticipating every possible response from Horizon's leadership. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a turning point, not only for one company, but potentially for how corporations handled discrimination across the country. The boardroom doors opened to reveal Richard Thompson and his executive team standing nervously. The long mahogany table was set with water bottles, notepads, and tense expressions. Richard stepped forward immediately, hand extended. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. We are deeply—" "Let's save the apologies for now," Veronica interrupted, her voice level but firm. "We have substantive issues to discuss." Richard nodded quickly, gesturing toward the head of the table, his usual seat. "Please." "Thank you," Veronica replied, taking the offered position of power without hesitation. Her team arranged themselves along one side of the table, facing the Horizon executives. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't a negotiation between equals, but a reckoning. Once everyone was seated, Veronica opened her leather portfolio. "Before we begin, I'd like to review exactly what happened yesterday, so we're all working from the same understanding." Without waiting for agreement, she nodded to James, who activated a projection on the wall screen. The video began playing, a compilation of footage from multiple passenger recordings showing different angles of her removal from the plane. The high-definition images were even more damning than the viral clips online, capturing every detail from Brandon Walsh's sneering expression to the security officer's unnecessary force. The boardroom was silent, except for the audio from the video. Several Horizon executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to watch but unwilling to look away. When the compilation ended with Veronica being marched through the terminal like a criminal, Richard's face had lost all color. "That is what happened," Veronica stated simply. "Not an interpretation or an allegation, but documented fact. Now, I'd like to hear from Brandon Walsh himself." Richard looked startled. "He's been suspended pending investigation, but we can certainly arrange—" "He's in the building," Veronica stated. Not a question, but a certainty. "My team confirmed he was called in this morning. Please have him join us." Richard hesitated only briefly before nodding to his assistant, who left to retrieve the flight attendant. Minutes later, Brandon Walsh entered the room, his usual confidence replaced by obvious anxiety. He wore his uniform despite his suspension, perhaps as armor against what was coming. "Mr. Walsh," Veronica acknowledged him with a slight nod. "Please explain to everyone present why you called security to remove me from the flight." Brandon glanced at Richard, who nodded grimly. "Ms. Mitchell was being disruptive," he began, his voice lacking conviction. "She was complaining about the service and making demands that interfered with my duties." "Specific demands," Veronica pressed. "What exactly did I demand?" Brandon swallowed. "You wanted a pre-flight beverage. The same beverage you had already served to every other first-class passenger," Veronica clarified. "And my tone? Was I shouting, using profanity, making threats?" "No," Brandon admitted reluctantly. "But your attitude was—" "My attitude," Veronica repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Interesting choice of words. Let me ask you something, Mr. Walsh. Do you believe you would have perceived the same attitude from a white male executive making an identical request?" The room fell silent. Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I don't need to hear your answer," Veronica continued. "Your actions spoke clearly enough." She turned to Richard. "I'd also like to hear from the security officers involved." Thomas Davis and Michael Roberts were brought in next, both looking considerably less imposing in the boardroom than they had on the plane. They repeated similar justifications. They were just following protocol, responding to reports of a disruptive passenger, doing their jobs. Veronica listened patiently before addressing them directly. "Officers, in your training, are you taught to physically remove passengers without attempting de-escalation? Are you instructed to confiscate their personal property? Are you trained to use force against individuals who have committed no crime?" Their uncomfortable silence was answer enough. "Thank you," Veronica said dismissively. "You may go." As the security officers and Brandon were escorted out, Veronica turned her attention back to the executives. "Now that we've established what happened, let's discuss why it happened. Ms. Phillips, I believe you have insight on this matter." Lauren Phillips straightened in her seat, surprised at being addressed directly by name. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell. As Chief Diversity Officer, I've documented numerous similar complaints about discriminatory treatment of passengers of color, particularly in premium cabins. My recommendations for addressing these issues have been consistently deprioritized." Richard looked betrayed, but Lauren continued with newfound confidence. "We have a systemic problem with how diversity, equity, and inclusion are viewed at Horizon, as public relations exercises rather than core business imperatives. The incident with Ms. Mitchell wasn't an anomaly, but a predictable outcome of our organizational culture." Veronica nodded appreciatively at Lauren's candor. "This brings us to the heart of the matter. What happened to me was humiliating and unjust. But I'm not here for personal restitution. I'm here because what happened to me happens to people of color every day, people without my resources or platform." She opened her portfolio and removed a document, sliding copies across the table to each executive. "These are our conditions for moving forward with any business relationship between Mitchell Capital Partners and Horizon Airlines." The executives eagerly grabbed the documents, desperate for a path to salvation, only to have their expressions fall as they read through the extensive requirements. "This is significant," Richard said carefully after scanning the first page. "As was my experience on your airline," Veronica replied evenly. "Let me highlight the key points. First, financial compensation. Mitchell Capital Partners will establish a $10 million fund for passengers who have experienced discrimination on Horizon flights, administered by an independent third party." William Foster, the head of cabin services, visibly winced. "Second, personnel changes. Brandon Walsh will be terminated, as will the security officers involved. More importantly, you will implement a comprehensive review of all customer-facing staff with discrimination complaints, conducted by an external audit firm." Richard nodded reluctantly. "That's reasonable." Third, structural changes. Your diversity and inclusion initiatives will be elevated to board-level priorities with dedicated funding and quarterly reviews. Ms. Phillips will be promoted to Executive Vice President with expanded authority and resources. Lauren tried to maintain her professional composure. but her surprise was evident. Fourth, training and accountability. All employees will undergo mandatory anti-bias training developed by experts in the field, with regular refreshers and performance metrics tied to inclusive behavior. Jonathan Pierce, the CFO, was frantically calculating costs on his tablet. And finally, Veronica continued, transparency and ongoing compliance. Horizon will publish quarterly reports on discrimination complaints and resolutions. An independent oversight committee will monitor progress for a minimum of 5 years. Richard placed the document down slowly. Ms. Mitchell, while we appreciate your thorough recommendations, some of these demands would require significant resources and fundamental changes to our operations. They would, Veronica agreed without apology. That's precisely the point. Perhaps we could discuss a more balanced approach, Richard suggested carefully. Veronica's expression remained impassive. Mr. Thompson, let me be clear about your position. Your company's stock has fallen 32% in 24 hours. You're facing multiple lawsuits, not just from me but from other passengers who have come forward with similar experiences. Your brand reputation has suffered damage that will take years to repair. And most critically, without the $5 billion in funding you're seeking, your airline faces potential bankruptcy within 18 months. She leaned forward slightly. This isn't a negotiation. These are the conditions under which Mitchell Capital would consider investing in Horizon Airlines. You're welcome to decline, of course, and seek funding elsewhere, though I imagine other investors might have similar concerns about your company's governance and culture after yesterday's events. The room fell silent as the executives exchanged glances, the reality of their situation sinking in. They weren't dealing with a passenger seeking an upgrade or compensation. They were facing a financial powerhouse who held their company's future in her hands. We'll need to consult with our board, Richard finally said. Of course, Veronica replied, standing smoothly. You have 24 hours to provide your answer. My team and I will await your decision. As she turned to leave, Richard called after her. Ms. Mitchell, may I ask one question? Why are you giving us a chance at all? After what happened, you would be justified in walking away completely. Veronica paused at the door. Because this isn't about punishment, Mr. Thompson. It's about transformation. Horizon Airlines employs over 20,000 people who had nothing to do with what happened to me. They deserve leadership that values them, all of them. The question is whether you're prepared to be that leadership. With those words hanging in the air, she and her team departed, leaving the Horizon executives to confront not just a business decision, but a moral reckoning that would define their company's future. The Horizon Airlines boardroom had transformed overnight from a space of corporate confidence to an arena of existential crisis. Board members who typically attended quarterly meetings via video conference had flown in from across the country for this emergency session. The usual pleasantries were absent. No coffee service, no casual conversations about golf scores or vacation homes. The gravity of the situation had stripped away all pretense. Richard Thompson stood at the head of the table, his presentation on the final slide summarizing Veronica Mitchell's conditions. The ensuing silence felt oppressive until Harold Blackwell, the longest-serving board member, finally spoke. This is extortion, the 72-year-old declared, slapping his hand on the printed conditions. She's using this unfortunate incident to force radical changes to our entire corporate structure. We should fight this. Lauren Phillips, invited to the board meeting for the first time in her tenure as Chief Diversity Officer, responded before Richard could. With all due respect, Mr. Blackwell, what leverage do we have to fight? Our stock has lost a third of its value. Cancellations are up 60%. We're hemorrhaging corporate accounts as companies distance themselves from us. And without Mitchell Capital's investment, we cannot finance our fleet renewal. There are other investors, Harold insisted. Jonathan Pierce, the CFO, shook his head grimly. Not anymore. I've received calls from 3 other potential funding sources this morning. They've all withdrawn interest. No one wants to be associated with us right now, and those still willing to talk are demanding terms that would essentially gut the airline. Melissa Rodriguez, one of the younger board members, leaned forward. Let's be honest with ourselves. What happened to Veronica Mitchell wasn't an unfortunate incident. It was discrimination, plain and simple. And it wasn't isolated. The data Lauren has presented shows a pattern that we've ignored for years. Maybe instead of seeing these conditions as punishment, we should recognize them as an opportunity to fix what's clearly broken. Harold scoffed. Next, you'll suggest we should thank Mitchell for dragging our company through the mud. No, Richard interjected, his voice finding new resolve. But Melissa is right about one thing. This is as much an opportunity as it is a crisis. I've spent the night reviewing every aspect of Mitchell's conditions, and here's what I've concluded. They're not just reasonable. They're necessary. The room fell silent as Richard continued, a new clarity in his voice. For too long, we've treated diversity and inclusion as checkbox exercises, something for the annual report, not something fundamental to how we operate. We've dismissed complaints from passengers of color as subjective, while celebrating customer service scores that only reflected the experiences of our majority white passengers. We've underfunded Lauren's department while spending millions on cosmetic brand refreshes. He walked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. I'm recommending we accept Mitchell's conditions in full, not just because we need her investment, but because it's the right thing to do. More than that, it's the smart thing to do. A company that discriminates against its customers is leaving money on the table. A company that ignores systemic problems is setting itself up for exactly the kind of crisis we're experiencing now. The debate that followed was heated. 2 board members threatened to resign if the conditions were accepted. 3 others threatened to resign if they weren't. The discussion continued for hours, expanding beyond Mitchell's specific demands to broader questions about the company's values and future. By late afternoon, exhaustion had replaced anger. The vote, when it finally came, wasn't unanimous. But it was decisive. Horizon Airlines would accept Veronica Mitchell's conditions in full, with 3 board members submitting their resignations in protest. As the boardroom emptied, Richard found himself alone with Lauren Phillips. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You've been trying to tell us this for months, and we didn't listen." "It shouldn't have taken a viral video and a stock crash to make change happen," Lauren replied. "But I'm glad it's happening now. The question is whether it will be genuine or just for show." "That's where you come in," Richard said. "As our new Executive Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, you'll have the authority and budget to ensure it's genuine. The board has approved everything: your promotion, expanded team, and direct reporting line to me and the board." Lauren's expression remained cautious. "Words and org charts are easy. Real change is hard." "I know," Richard acknowledged. "That's why our first action needs to be public and decisive." The following morning, Richard Thompson stood before a forest of microphones in the Horizon Airlines press room. Television cameras broadcast the event live across all major networks, a level of coverage typically reserved for airline disasters, which, in many ways, this was. "Good morning," Richard began, his expression solemn. 2 days ago, a passenger on Horizon Airlines Flight 1523 was subjected to treatment that was discriminatory, humiliating, and completely unacceptable. That passenger was Dr. Veronica Mitchell, a distinguished business leader. But this statement isn't just about Dr. Mitchell. It's about acknowledging a pattern of behavior that has affected many passengers who don't have her platform or resources. He paused, departing from the carefully prepared statement. "I want to speak directly to every person who has ever felt unwelcome, disrespected, or discriminated against on our airline. I am deeply sorry, not just as CEO of this company, but as a human being who believes in dignity and respect for all. What happened was wrong, and it reflects failures that go beyond any individual employee." Richard then outlined the actions Horizon was taking immediately. The termination of Brandon Walsh and the security officers involved, the establishment of the Passenger Restitution Fund, the promotion of Lauren Phillips to executive leadership, comprehensive anti-bias training for all staff, and the creation of an independent oversight committee. As cameras flashed, Richard introduced the unexpected figure standing beside him. "I'd also like to introduce Sophia Williams, the passenger who bravely stood up for Dr. Mitchell during the incident. Ms. Williams has agreed to join Horizon Airlines as our new head of passenger experience, bringing her background as both an attorney and a customer advocate to help us rebuild trust with our passengers." Sophia stepped forward, her copper hair gleaming under the press lights. "When I witnessed what happened to Dr. Mitchell, I knew I couldn't stay silent. Now, I have the opportunity to ensure that every passenger receives the respect and dignity they deserve, regardless of their race, gender, or background. This is about creating systemic change, not just responding to a crisis." Back at Mitchell Capital Partners, Veronica watched the press conference on the large screen in her office. Her team gathered around her. The transformation beginning at Horizon Airlines was just the first step in what she envisioned as a broader impact across the industry. "They're saying all the right things," Michelle observed cautiously. "But will it translate to real change? That's why we built in the Oversight Committee and tied the funding to measurable outcomes," Veronica replied. "This isn't about trust. It's about verification and accountability." Over the following weeks, Horizon Airlines began the painful but necessary process of transformation. The initial changes were visible and immediate. New signage throughout airports emphasizing respect for all passengers, revised boarding procedures that eliminated subjective judgments by gate agents, body cameras for all security personnel to ensure accountability. Deeper changes took more time. Lauren Phillips assembled a team of experts to redesign training programs, focusing not just on conscious bias, but on the unconscious prejudices that often drove discriminatory behavior. Complaint data was analyzed for patterns, revealing troubling trends at certain airports and among specific teams that had previously been dismissed as statistical anomalies. Not everyone embraced the changes. Some employees resigned rather than participate in the mandatory training. Others complained about political correctness or reverse discrimination. But a surprising number welcomed the transformation, particularly younger staff and employees of color who had long felt marginalized within the company. 3 months after the incident, Horizon stock had recovered half its losses. Cancellations had returned to normal levels, and most importantly, complaints about discriminatory treatment had decreased by 60%. Veronica received regular reports from the Oversight Committee, tracking progress against the agreed metrics. She remained cautiously optimistic, but knew that real cultural change would take years, not months. The question remained: had the humiliation she experienced truly sparked meaningful transformation, or merely a sophisticated public relations exercise? The answer would come not from press releases or policy documents, but from the experiences of thousands of passengers boarding Horizon flights each day. Passengers who would never know how one woman's stand against injustice had changed the company that served them. 1 year to the day after Veronica Mitchell was dragged off Horizon Airlines Flight 1523, she found herself walking into the gleaming headquarters of Mitchell Capital Partners for a meeting that would bring the extraordinary saga full circle. The past 12 months had transformed not just one airline, but had sent ripples throughout the entire industry. The conference room was filled with faces both familiar and new. Richard Thompson and Lauren Phillips represented Horizon Airlines, alongside Sophia Williams, whose role as head of passenger experience had evolved into a position with genuine authority. On Veronica's side sat her trusted team who had helped craft the strategy that turned humiliation into systemic change. Between them lay the final assessment report from the Independent Oversight Committee, 300 pages documenting Horizon's journey from crisis to transformation. "Thank you all for coming," Veronica began, her voice carrying the same quiet confidence that had guided her through this unprecedented year. "Today marks an important milestone in our agreement. The Oversight Committee has submitted their comprehensive 1-year assessment, and it's time to make a decision about the final phase of funding." Richard nodded, the past year having visibly aged him, though there was a new depth to his presence, the look of a leader who had faced a reckoning and emerged changed. "We appreciate the opportunity to discuss their findings in person." Veronica gestured to the thick report. The committee's assessment is remarkably thorough. Rather than summarizing it myself, I'd like to hear directly from you. What have been the most significant changes at Horizon Airlines this past year? Lauren Phillips spoke first, her newly confident demeanor a stark contrast to the hesitant diversity officer of a year ago. The most visible change has been in our training programs. Every employee, from baggage handlers to board members, has completed comprehensive anti-bias training. But the real difference is that this isn't a one-time exercise. It's now integrated into our ongoing professional development. She consulted her notes. Complaints of discriminatory treatment have decreased by 78%. When incidents do occur, they're addressed immediately through our new resolution protocol rather than dismissed or buried in bureaucracy. Sophia Williams added, "From the passenger perspective, we've completely redesigned how we deliver service. Our customer satisfaction scores have actually increased among all demographic groups, proving that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business." Richard cleared his throat. The most profound change, however, has been cultural. A year ago, Horizon was a company where diversity initiatives were siloed and marginalized. Today, inclusion is a core business metric tracked with the same rigor as on-time performance or fuel efficiency. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I won't pretend it's been easy. We've lost employees who couldn't or wouldn't adapt. We've faced backlash from certain customer segments. The financial investment has been substantial, but the airline that exists today is fundamentally stronger than the one that existed a year ago." Veronica listened attentively, then turned to her financial strategist. "William, what's your assessment of Horizon's financial position compared to last year?" William Turner consulted his tablet. "Their stock has not only recovered but is trading 12% above pre-incident levels. Their customer retention metrics have improved, particularly among business travelers, and their operational efficiency has increased, partly due to the cultural changes that have reduced employee turnover and improved teamwork." Veronica nodded, taking in all the information before speaking again. "When I was removed from that plane a year ago, I had two choices: seek personal compensation or push for systemic change. The easy path would have been to accept a settlement, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and allow Horizon to continue business as usual." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "But that would have been a betrayal of every person who has ever experienced discrimination without the resources to fight back. My position gave me leverage that most victims of bias never have. The question was how to use that leverage responsibly." Turning back to the group, she continued, "The Oversight Committee's report confirms what your presentation suggests. Horizon Airlines has undergone genuine transformation. Not perfect, no organization is, but substantial and sincere. Therefore, I'm pleased to announce that Mitchell Capital Partners will proceed with the final phase of funding as outlined in our agreement." The relief in the room was palpable. The $5 billion investment would secure Horizon's fleet renewal program and ensure the airline's competitive position for years to come. But Veronica wasn't finished. "However, this isn't the end of our involvement. The Oversight Committee will continue its work for the full 5 years originally agreed upon. And we're adding a new condition. Horizon will collaborate with other airlines to develop industry-wide standards for inclusive customer service and anti-discrimination practices." Richard looked surprised, but nodded in agreement. "We would be honored to lead that initiative." "Excellent," Veronica said. "Because what happened to me wasn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It reflected broader patterns that exist throughout the transportation industry and beyond. Real change requires collective action." The meeting concluded with the signing of the final funding documents. As handshakes were exchanged and the Horizon team prepared to leave, Richard approached Veronica privately. "I've been wanting to ask you something for months," he said. "You could have destroyed our company. You had every right to. Why did you choose this path instead?" Veronica considered the question. "When I was building my firm, a mentor told me something I've never forgotten. Power isn't about what you can break. It's about what you can build. What happened to me was an opportunity to build something better, not just for me, but for everyone who boards a plane expecting to be treated with basic human dignity. 2 weeks later, Veronica Mitchell found herself doing something she hadn't done since the incident: boarding a Horizon Airlines flight. She had deliberately booked the same route, Chicago to London, though not for business this time, but to deliver a keynote address at a global conference on corporate responsibility. As she approached the gate, there were no double takes from the agent, no questions about her first-class ticket. The boarding process was orderly and respectful, with clear procedures that eliminated the subjective judgments that had previously allowed bias to flourish. On board, the flight attendant, a young black woman who had been hired during Horizon's expanded recruitment initiative, greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Mitchell. May I offer you a pre-flight beverage?" The simple interaction, so ordinary for most passengers but once denied to her, represented the culmination of a year's work. Veronica accepted the drink with a smile, settling into her seat and observing the diverse crew working efficiently together. As the plane taxied for takeoff, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The incident that could have been merely a personal humiliation had instead become a case study taught in business schools across the country, a powerful example of how corporate accountability could drive meaningful change. The Horizon Airlines that existed today was fundamentally different from the one that had discriminated against her a year ago. Its leadership had been transformed, its practices overhauled, its culture reimagined. More importantly, it had become a model for other companies facing their own reckonings with systemic bias. Veronica opened her laptop to review her keynote speech. The title slide read, "Beyond Diversity: Transforming Corporate Culture Through Accountability and Action." Her personal experience would serve as the opening narrative, but the message went far beyond one incident or one company. The true resolution wasn't just that Horizon Airlines had changed. It was that Veronica had used her position of power to create ripples that would continue long after this particular story faded from headlines. The Passenger Restitution Fund had already helped dozens of people who had experienced discrimination. The Industry Standards Initiative was gaining support from other airlines, and throughout corporate America, executives were paying attention, recognizing that discrimination wasn't just morally wrong, but increasingly costly. As the plane lifted into the clouds, Veronica closed her laptop and looked out the window at the receding cityscape. The true measure of justice wasn't punishment, but transformation, not just for one company, but for a system that had tolerated discrimination for too long. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Numbers don't lie, and they don't care about the color of your skin. In the end, she had used the language of business, profits, stock prices, and investment capital to drive changes that mere moral arguments had failed to achieve. She had translated the experience of discrimination into terms that corporate America couldn't ignore. And in doing so, she had demonstrated that true equality wasn't about special treatment. It was about the absence of discrimination, the right of every person to be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. What would you do if you were in Veronica's position? Would you have used your power to demand change like she did? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories of justice and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that one person can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. Thank you for watching, and remember, real change happens when we hold power accountable. This story illustrates how power and privilege can be leveraged for meaningful change when discrimination occurs. Veronica Mitchell didn't just seek personal compensation or revenge. She recognized her unique position to create systemic transformation. Her approach teaches us several important lessons about addressing racism in corporate America. First, accountability requires both consequences and constructive pathways forward. By offering conditional funding instead of just punishment, Veronica created incentives for genuine change rather than superficial apologies. Second, discrimination is often systemic rather than isolated. The problem wasn't just one flight attendant, but an entire corporate culture that tolerated bias. Real solution must address root causes through policy changes, training, representation in leadership, and ongoing oversight. Third, economic leverage can drive social justice when moral arguments fail. By translating discrimination into business terms, stock prices, customer satisfaction, and financial viability, Veronica forced the company to recognize that inclusion isn't just ethical, but profitable. Finally, the story demonstrates that true equality isn't special treatment, but the absence of discrimination. Veronica didn't want extraordinary service. She wanted the same respect afforded to others. For those without Veronica's resources, this story offers hope that corporations can be held accountable. It also challenges those with privilege to consider how they might use their position not just for personal benefit, but to create more just systems for everyone. What would you do if you were in Veronica's position? Would you have used your power to demand change like she did? Or would you have taken a different approach? Comment below with your thoughts on how you would have handled this situation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help others find it too. The fight against discrimination happens one conversation at a time, and your support helps amplify these important messages. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about people standing up against injustice and creating positive change in the world. We share new content every week that will inspire, educate, and empower you. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one person can make a difference when they refuse to accept discrimination. Whether you're in a position of power like Veronica or simply a witness like Sophia, your actions matter. Thank you for watching. And remember, real change happens when we all take responsibility for building a more just and equitable world. Together, we can transform systems that have tolerated discrimination for far too long.